You're listening to the Journey Podcast. The Journey is a ministry of Southcrest Baptist Church for those in college or college-aged. We hope this podcast helps you find your greatest pleasure and purpose in Jesus.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Journey Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time to tune in. I'm David. This is Tyler.
I'm Tyler. This is David.
Hi. Welcome. Have you ever listened or watched the Salty TV show?
Yeah, Salty the Bible, but not
the Bible.
S-A-L-T.
Salty.
Like Psalms. So, Salty. It'll give you nightmares. Yeah.
And help you find your greatest pleasure and purpose in Jesus.
Yes. I think. I don't know.
Maybe not.
I don't know if Salty will do that or not. It might make you salty, you know. But that's a good lead in.
It's good. Yeah, it really is. It's a good setup. We're talking about salt today.
We are. Yeah. Pink salt, white salt, Himalayan salt.
We use pink Himalayan salt because it makes us more healthy than everyone else because there's all these minerals in it. And It's definitely a real thing.
We import ours from the Dead Sea. So that's where we get our salt from. Actually, we get our salt from United. What is it?
Morton's.
Salt?
Kosher?
No, I'm kidding. We just use popcorn salt on everything.
Flaky, extra large flakes.
Yeah.
I do love flake salt.
We're just going to talk about salt.
Yeah.
The whole episode.
The whole episode. I mean, we kind of are though, right? Like,
Yes, we are.
what does salt do?
That's a good question. Yeah,
Because it does a lot of things, right?
it does.
You talked about this last night.
Was there anything at TNG that I didn't mention that you were like, salt does this as well?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, you said that you found that it was like just 21 different things, right? Different functions.
Yeah, like 20 plus.
20 plus. Yeah. So yeah, I didn't think of anything during your talk, but like, did you see a list of it, or what? Like, what are some other functions of it? Like,
I didn't see a list, but
because that's a lot.
Yeah. So I was kind of taking it at its word, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a preservative. So let's talk about this for a second.
Yeah.
Salt is a preservative, right? So in Jesus's day and time, they would cover meat with salt so that it could stay fresh longer. And so let me ask you this, because ultimately what we're talking about is we're talking about Matthew chapter 5. In fact, I want to read that because that's kind of where we were. Okay. Matthew chapter 5. Pulling it up, guys. So bear with me for a second. Matthew 5:13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? With an S, not with a P. It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under the people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Okay, and so that's why we're talking about salt, because we finished up this disciple series where we're looking at characteristics and traits of what a follower of Jesus looks like. And what we said, to kind of wrap it up, was a disciple is light in darkness, salt to a decaying world, right? And so back to that question, like, what is salt? So, like, characteristics of salt is a preservative. So let me ask you this. How does that apply? Like, salt being a preservative, how does that apply to the Christian?
Yeah. What I love the way you said it, like, we're salt in a decaying world, right? We're like, so I guess you could, like, we're striving to live in God's word and like follow after him and live in his way, practice the way of Jesus. And so like in a way we are like slowing the decay that sin is causing in culture and in the world. And
Yeah. No,
is that the right direction?
no. I think that's definitely the right direction. And like one of the things that I think about, especially when it comes to that aspect of like preservative, man, like as Christians, as followers of Jesus, like we seek out and we preserve like the good that we see and that we find. Like we want to prop that up and push that up and preserve that, like as followers of Jesus. And so there's this idea that salt is a preservative. Salt flavors, right? Are you put salt on stuff before you taste it, or do you like to taste the food before?
I usually would taste it before,
Okay.
but I'm getting better at that.
Yeah.
Allie gets on to me because I'm like a very hardcore follow the instructions and the recipe person when I cook. And so she's right. I'm trying to get better about just tasting and going.
Yeah. There was a lot of hands at T&G that said they put salt on anything before they try it. What about you guys, ladies? Do y'all put salt on stuff before you try it? No. Okay. Not anymore. Okay. Cholesterol levels?
My mom would get mad at me. She's like, try it first.
Okay.
and then-
Yeah. Yeah, you should try it first. But like salt adds flavor to things. And so how does that apply? Like what does that mean for the Christian?
Well, something that I'm thinking about, right, is, which maybe this is going to take us the wrong direction. You tell me. But, right, because like salt enhances what's already there. Is there something to that? Like the, what is, how does that apply? Does that work?
Yeah,
Right,
I think you're onto something. Like you're enhancing, or you should be, like based on your values, like enhancing society, enhancing the people that are closest around you. And so like you are making, like by the way you live, which is where we're going to kind of head, like, but by the way you live, like your life should like lead to others saying, I want a taste of that. Right. And so, I think you're onto something. Yeah. Like it should definitely enhance.
I like a decent amount of salt in my food. Yeah.
I've never really add stuff like, when it comes to salt, I just leave it as it is.
Yeah. No salt for you?
No, very rarely.
What about on a steak?
No, like I want it. Give me some butter, maybe.
Man, I want a good amount of salt on my steak.
Okay. I'm sorry.
How could you?
I know. The other thing we talked about is salt stings, right? If you have like an open wound and you put salt on it, it's going to burn. So what does that look like?
That looks like it hurts.
Yeah, it does hurt.
Salt in the wound.
So as a Christian, you're to be the salt of the earth, right? So how does that apply? Like, I think it looks like, man, like when you see wrongdoing, transgression, even in someone's life personally, and you're calling that out in love, speaking truth in love, it's going to hurt. Like it's not easy to do that. And it hurts, especially the people that like you're having to have that conversation with.
Yeah.
It hurts, but it's necessary.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, it's kind of doing everything that we already talked about in the application of like the wound.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're killing bacteria and keeping it from getting infected. and helping in the healing process. But yeah, I guess did we talk about that last week, right? About like having to have hard, or was it 2 weeks ago? Having to have hard conversations with people.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. But it's like, it's a good application of that. Like that it's healing and it's important, but it comes with some upfront sting.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last thing we talked about was when you eat a lot of salt, right? What happens? You get
Thirsty.
thirsty. And so salt creates thirst. And so like what type of, really the application I think ultimately was like what type of thirst are you creating for those around you? Like are you creating a thirst for more of the world, or are you creating a thirst for the things of God, right? With the way you live. So
Yeah. You said that we lose influence when sin creeps in. And I guess that was in relation to maybe it's stinging and creating thirst, but
yeah, that was so Jesus in that passage asked the question, because I talked about how he's really good at asking rhetorical questions, right? And Jesus asked in that passage, like, can salt lose its flavor, like its taste? Can salt lose its saltiness? And the answer obviously is no. Like salt can't lose its saltiness, but it can become diluted. It can become mixed with things that aren't meant to be a part of it, because in that day and time they were mining the salt from the Dead Sea, and sometimes like minerals would get mixed in with the salt, and so they'd have to throw it out.
You were talking about it being trampled on the pathway.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that. I thought about that, at least about it being trampled on the
and so that's kind of what Jesus was talking about when he says it's no longer good for anything but to just be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. And so they would just throw it on the path for it to be trampled on. And so no, salt can't lose its taste or its saltiness, but it can become like contaminated. It can become watered down. And so that the idea there is like, man, when we're following Jesus and we allow sin to creep in, like we lose influence. We lose the influence that we have in people's lives and in society. I think that's why it's so devastating when you do come across like, whether it's a celebrity pastor or a figure in Christianity that's kind of, you would say, is high up for you, and you hear about them falling. I think it's so devastating from the standpoint of, they had an influence in your life, and now they've kind of like, fallen to a point where you're like, well, what was the point in all of it, And I think that's a whole nother conversation for another day, but there is this idea that we are able to influence people by how we live. And when we allow sin to creep into our lives, we lose that influence, or maybe not even lose that influence, but we start to push people in the wrong direction, with the influence that we have. So,
and then, so we talked about salt, and then in that passage it also talks about light. So now you kind of went through a similar process on the topic of light, and like, what does light do? Yeah. And we talked about, which I would love for you to unpack this more, like it's about, it can be used as a warning, as a guide. Light shines in dark places. And
so light does all of those things. Guides us, it shines, it warns us. But I felt like, man, the really important thing to understand from especially this passage is when it talks about the light, like, you and I are not the light. We're just reflecting the light. Yeah. And I gave kind of the analogy of the moon, right? Like the moon is reflecting the sun. And so the light that comes from the moon is the light from the sun that it's reflecting. And without the sun, that moon isn't giving off any light. Yeah. And so you and I, like we're a reflection. We're reflecting the light of Christ, or we should be. And so, like I think that's that when Jesus talks about like no one lights a lamp and then puts it under a basket, that wouldn't make sense because you're hiding the light that like it took you a long time to, get lit. Get lit. And so you're hiding that light, and that wouldn't make sense. You're using it for the purposes that it's not used, like supposed to be used for. That was the guitar analogy that I picked up. Like the guitar that David has is a beautiful instrument, but when I use it in ways that it's not meant to be used for, it like its purpose is almost like,
diminished or destroyed, even
diminished,
right?
destroyed.
Like, if you used it as a baseball bat, it would not only be ugly, it would be destroyed.
And that's not what it's meant to be used for. And I talked to the college students about how, like, when we don't understand the purpose that we have here, like the purpose of that guitar is to be played and strummed. When we don't understand the purpose that God has us here for, then we're missing it. And so it doesn't make sense when God shines the light of salvation in our lives to hide that from people. That's kind of the point there.
So you also, and I hope I'm not jumping ahead here, but you got real specific on, I know one that hit me real hard. I've been off social media for a little while, was talking about like, hey, what if somebody looks at your Instagram algorithm, things like that. And you said some other things. What were some of the other things that you brought up then? Because it was heavy.
Yeah, we were talking about like ultimately like your purpose. And so we brought in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, and how Paul says like you were created for good works that God prepared before like the foundation of the world, like beforehand. And you are God's masterpiece, right? And so like you are preaching something with your life. There's this idea that you're preaching something with your life. And so like what type of sermon are you giving people, right? And so we talked about like if someone looked at your Instagram algorithm, what type of sermon are you preaching with that? If someone looked at your For You page on your Netflix account, what type of sermon are you preaching to people? If I'm trying to think of other examples that would like, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't really know, but like the TikTok algorithm, right? Like if they saw that on your phone, what type of sermon are you preaching? I brought up like, man, maybe people saw you lose it at your intramural football game.
Oh yeah, that's when you said,
like, what type of sermon are you preaching even in that moment? And so like this, and I know this seems like really like specific and detailed and like, man, is it really like this big of a deal? But I think Jesus' point is, yes, it is.
Yeah,
like
it's a huge deal.
Like you are the light of the world. Like you are the salt of the earth. Like that, your purpose, that's your purpose.
Yeah.
Right. And so everything you do is a reflection one way or the other. And so,
in our small group on Monday, I've been feeling burdened by like, I want to put the sins of my past, like I want them gone. You know what I mean? Like John Owen, I need to read it again, but Mortification of Sin. He has a book where he talks about, it's an old book, but talks about this, about just like putting sin to death. And so I think all those specific examples were really like helpful to me in seeing like, you know what? Because like I said, I probably won't be off social media forever, but like in all of these examples, I feel like I could comment on areas where I've failed, right? Like man, if something is, if I'm not shining the light, or if like the life that I'm preaching to people is not holy, right? Or is still like connected to sin or something that's like, I'm going to do whatever I can to change it.
Yeah.
It's like, get it out. Right.
Yeah.
And so with social media, that's something that I've noticed for me a lot. It's like, man, maybe someday I can trust my algorithm in the future. But right now, the way I look at my social media right now is like, man, there's just too much bad influence for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, you know what? I'm not going to let it cross my eyes right now because I'm ready to put this to death. Right.
Yeah.
But thinking about intramurals and games and different stuff like that, like I like to play video games, and I know that's an area where I know that I've known a lot of people and seen where it's like, oh, it's like you're in this private, even if you are with someone,
You
it's
like
like
trash talking 12-year-olds.
trash talking them, like Fortnite, going after them, no, but right, like that's an area just like in intramurals where it's like in competition and excitement and fun, people like forget every action, right? Every word, right, is shining, or it's preaching something, right? Is what you said.
Yeah.
And
Miss Pam Copeland, she said something before that I think is really important. I'm going to butcher how she says it, but she talks about like never give someone an excuse to think like, differently about your motives or something like that. So in other words, like it's in, I totally butchered it. That's not how she said it, but the idea that she's getting at is like, man, like the person you are with that person, be the same person you are with this person. And I brought up last night, the idea like, man, it's exhausting. Like trying to live two different lives, like trying to be this person with this crowd and this person with this crowd. Yeah. Right. And so like my suggestion and really like the challenge I think is either be all in with this crowd or all in with this crowd, because like you're wearing yourself out. Yeah. You're getting exhausted trying to play two different lives. Yeah. And so you need to choose like one way or the other, like where you're going to go. Yeah. And
that applies to all of those specific examples, like social media, intramural sports, video games, all the different things, right? Where it's like, hey, it's not necessarily like you can't do any of those things, but like what company are you in, right? Yeah. Like whether it's your algorithm or your sports teams or your video game, like friends or whatever, something like that. Like, get away from that, and,
you said the word holy, and it made me think of the Justin Bieber Chance the Rapper song. Y'all know that song?
Yeah, we're actually doing that song this Sunday. Yeah. No.
Feel so holy. Yeah, that song. Harvey used to sing it all the time. Oh, yeah. Literally all the time. In fact, I played it for him like last week. I was like, you remember you used to sing the song when you were like 2? And he was like, oh, yeah. He used to especially sing the part where Chance the Rapper came in and started talking about like pimps and...
Oh, yeah. That's his favorite part, yeah. My gosh. Yeah, we don't let our kids listen to terrible stuff like that.
I know. I'm sorry.
No.
Anyways.
No. What are we talking about today?
Should we get into it?
Should we start it up? Let's go. Oh my gosh. Yeah, get out of that social media algorithm.
Yeah.
You know what? Stop listening to terrible songs like Justin Bieber's Holy. I'm just kidding. That's a great song. Bridgerton, stop watching Bridgerton. I feel like it's going off the rails. Okay, it's going off the rails. I'm sorry. Yeah. Man, like serious talk though. Like, man, that's another thing. Talked about with my home group like this is like, man, I go through these ups and downs, right? Like, and I think it usually coincides with some moral failure or whatever that I feel ashamed of, where all of a sudden my like tone changes, and the reality is what's going on in my heart is I feel guilty and ashamed, and so all of a sudden my tone changes from like the gung ho, like, yeah, we're putting sin to death, to just like, let's not talk about it today. And I hate that, right? Because again, it's like, no, like let's get out of that junk and move forward and let the light shine, like, but for real, like I want to get serious and this not be, and then this not, I mean, I know there's going to be ups and downs. That's just, I realize like I'm a human and I'm broken and I messed up.
Well, the goal is
like,
not perfection.
Yeah.
That's not the goal.
Perfection,
I think the goal is like just saying, hey, how can I look more like Christ than I did yesterday?
Yeah.
The goal is walking in step with the Spirit as you pursue sanctification.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's the goal. Can we end with this little light of mine?
Yeah. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. Lower. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine.
Let it shine. Let it shine.
Should we keep going, y'all? No? Olivia says no. Okay. All right. Hey, thanks so much for watching, listening to the Journey podcast. I feel like this has been a real weird one. Okay. I'm sorry. Maybe I really should have found like a fourth cup of coffee. I'm sorry. Okay. You're right. It's been good. Thanks again for listening. Hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast, if this podcast has helped you find your greatest pleasure and purpose in Jesus, please share it with a friend. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. I don't even know if that's an option in most places where you're listening, but yeah, do those things. Thanks so much for listening. You guys are sent. Peace.